Welcome to the Love the Star podcast. I'm Bobby Belt, Dallas Cowboys insider for 105 through the Fan in Dallas. Joined as always by former Super Bowl winning NFL scout Brian Broaddus. He is now the co-host of the G-Bag Nation, 2 to 7 p.m. Central, Monday through Friday on 105 through the Fan in Dallas. He's also the pre- and post-game co-host on the Dallas Cowboys radio network, and he's actually directly across from me today.
How about that? Same building, huh?
Same building, same room, just right here. We're so close. I could reach out and high-five you, Brian, if I needed to. And you will get a chance to do another pre- and post-game hit from AT&T Stadium. The Dallas Cowboys take care of business, obviously, against the Washington Commanders. They win the NFC East. They finish 12-5. It is the same 12-5 record that they've had each of the previous 2 years. They will draw the Green Bay Packers, 3:30 kickoff Sunday. We'll dive into the Packers in a couple episodes later this week. But first, I just wanted to take this first segment, and next segment, we'll talk a little bit about some of the developments of interview requests for Will McClay, Dan Quinn, where things stand there. But just in this opening segment, I kind of want to take a look back at the Cowboys season, what we think this team is heading into the postseason, where they're vulnerable, where they've got a strength heading to it. Before we dive into all of that, though, I'm curious, Green Bay, before we get into this actual deep dive on them, just on a cursory view, is that the preferred opponent, you think, that was set up for the Cowboys when you looked at it? It was probably going to be Seahawks, Packers, or Rams. Is Packers probably the best draw you could have hoped for?
Without looking at Green Bay, and I've seen them, because we get in that deal where they play the same time as you do. They, sometimes, maybe their games are a little bit different. I haven't seen, like between shows. I did my show at the Star Cowboys break, and then I come here to do my 2 to 7 show, and I just kind of just took a little look, and there's things about Green Bay's defense that seems like that they have some problems with. I think when you look at where they have some problems with, you see some people make plays on them in the secondary and stuff. Their pass rush appears to be pretty good. They get pressure, but I was just watching the Bears game, and I don't know if it's the preferred matchup just because they're one of these teams that they've gotten hot going into the playoffs. They've won, 7 of the last 9 games. So they've gotten hot. I'm looking forward to seeing the Tampa game
where Baker Mayfield
really lit them up.
I saw some of that game. I just remember the second half. Obviously, it was just a TV copy, but I do remember the second half of that game. They could not stop Tampa Bay on offense. What Tampa Bay wanted to do, they could do. And obviously Baker Mayfield comes in there, gets a perfect pass rating. So we'll have a lot more details on the Packers later this week.
But I don't know if that's the preferred one, just because you're playing a young quarterback, first time in the playoffs for him.
Playing really well too.
Playing really well. And, they've got kind of a group of receivers we need to learn about. They got a running game, or they've gone to the running game the last 3 weeks. So is it the preferred? Me, I have that phobia about playing the Rams.
Yeah.
But I always worry about teams, Bobby, that are playing hot going into the playoffs. The Packers have been playing playoff games since week 12.
Yeah.
If you look at them, every week is a playoff game for them, and so same with the Rams and these other teams that are the 6th, 7th seed. You got a team like the Eagles who were at one time the number 1 seed and now have dropped all the way down to 5 because of, the 1-5 in the last month and so of the season.
Now, Cowboys, obviously, like we said, they finished 12-5, third year in a row where they finished with that record. They win the NFC East. It takes a miraculous collapse, like you just mentioned there, from the Philadelphia Eagles. But as they head into this postseason, if I were to say, hey, Brian, give me your best just capsule. Like if somebody were to interview you on Green Bay radio and say, hey, just give me like a quick 1 or 2 minute description. Who is this football team? What do they do well? What do they struggle with? How would you define this Dallas Cowboys football team in 2023?
They have an elite wide receiver who is very difficult to defend. And the Cowboys have kind of figured out here the last couple of weeks that throwing him the ball 17 times is an okay thing to do. You've got a quarterback that's playing at a very high level, almost an MVP-like level. He'll be in that conversation. They don't run the ball at all, or they don't run it well enough, put it that way. They struggle with the run. On defense, they put a lot of pressure on you. They've gotten better defending the run. They've got some outstanding playmakers other than Micah Parsons that you're going to have to deal with. And if you want to potentially make plays on them, it might be throwing the football if you can block their front. They have given up some pass plays. They've been better at times playing pass defense, but at the end of games, we've seen it the last couple of weeks with the Dolphins and then with the Lions, though, that final drive of games kind of being a little bit of a problem. But overall, though, it's a team it's really good on special teams as well when you start to talk about the kicking and the punting situation.
Now, obviously it's the run game on both sides that seems to be the biggest hindrance to this football team right now. It's the run game in terms of stopping it. And at times it's been better in recent weeks than it had been. Obviously, they're not getting gashed the same way they were against Buffalo. They got a really good running team in Detroit, a really good running team in Miami, and they held them below what they had done for a lot of the season. So there's a lot of positivity there. You hopefully maybe built on something a little bit with the run game against Washington. They've run the ball well against Washington in recent years, though. So there's not the
two best games of running the ball has been against the Commanders.
If I could tell you that, hey, snap your fingers, and one of those is going to be fixed, the other is not, but I can guarantee you'll fix the other. Would you rather this offense be able to run the ball more effectively or be able to stop the run on the defensive side?
I would be scared that something happened to me like what happened in Buffalo. Let me stop the run. Because I know in my heart of hearts that this playoff run is going to be on the shoulders of Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, Mike McCarthy, Ferguson. That's where we'll see what with the offensive line and the health and how that maintains throughout the playoffs. But I know my playoff existence really is going to be about them throwing the football. That's kind of where I think this is going to go. I don't think they're going to magically, like you said, snap your fingers. But if you could, I just fear a team just loading up and running the football like Buffalo did. That was probably the worst game. You talk about the San Francisco game, the game against the Buffalo Bills, I think was the worst game that they've played all year.
Yeah, I think that, in terms of just complete utter failure, everything surrounding it, the Buffalo game was one that was concerning. And that was something that you hope they were going to alleviate some of those fears the following weekend in Miami. Yeah. They did, in terms of they played better on the road, but they still had their struggles on offense. They couldn't make a stop down the stretch, but the run defense was better. Did you get some of those fears out of the way against Detroit? Did you answer some of those questions there? And then obviously against Washington, you had a chance to take it and you went ahead and took it, and you closed the season on a very strong note in a stadium that has been a little bit of a, I don't want to say quite house of horrors, but it's been a difficult place to play for your quarterback the last couple of years. And he played well in a really cold and windy environment and didn't let some of the frustrations get him down. When they get the blocked field goal, when they get the tipped interception, they didn't let that, discourage them and overwhelm them a little bit. Do you think we learned something in the final month of the season about this team's resolve and about their mental toughness and their character? Or do you think that still has yet to be challenged in a way like it was against Buffalo?
I think their best win this year has been against the Detroit Lions. And I think that was a game that had everything about it could have gone completely bad and wrong for you. You could talk about the officiating and all that at the end, but it was a tough, gritty win. They needed to move the ball. They were able to move the ball. Unfortunately, though, they couldn't run the ball. That's something, I think that Mike McCarthy has kind of learned now. Yeah. Dak, I think if Dak had to do it over, I think he would have just taken some of the shorter throws and then found a way to kind of keep the clock running. But that was a tough, gritty win for them in really a playoff game. That game right there got you the second overall seed.
Yeah.
And so that to me, I think they learned something about themselves, having to play. They held the Lions in check basically for 59 minutes in that game. They really, really did. So I look at that as I learned a lot about them being able to kind of close that thing out in a way play in a way to give them an opportunity to win the game.
Now, as they head into this postseason run here, which they hope, they've got themselves, if they win the game, if they win the wild card game, they've guaranteed themselves 2 home playoff games.
Right.
And, they put themselves in a position that if somebody picks off San Francisco for you, you're looking at a 3rd home playoff game. Right. So they put themselves in a good position for this playoff run. But as we enter it, we obviously know Dak Prescott's a big part of this. CeeDee Lamb's a big part of this. Mike Parsons is a big part of this. Who do you look at on this team and say, there's the X factor right there. There's the guy that if I can get him to play really well, or if this guy plays on top of his game, it's going to be really difficult to beat this Cowboys team.
There's a couple of guys that I really look at. I mean, on the offensive side of the ball, I think that Brandon Cooks is that guy, because what we've learned about Brandon Cooks, if somebody were to try and take Lamb out of a game,
yeah.
The one thing I know about Brandon, I from 20 to 20, I could get Jake Ferguson involved in the game plan and he'll be fine. And you can move the football. I know when I get down into the red zone, or I get outside the red zone, say 30, 35 yards out, I know I could throw the ball in the end zone to Brandon Cooks. He's going to make the play. I know when I get down in the red zone that Brandon Cooks is going to make a play down there too. He's the one receiver that you have that can score points for you down outside the 35-yard line. And he's the one guy that can score when you get down inside the 20. To me, give me Brandon Cooks as that guy that if they take away Ferguson or they try and take away Lamb, which I think will be difficult to do, I know Cooks can make some plays.
I'll tell you somebody who down the stretch played really, really well, and I think really answered the call in the final 6 weeks of the season after there were a lot of, I know we talked about him on the show as a lot of pressure on
Wilson.
Jordan Lewis.
Yeah.
I think Jordan Lewis has played really good football in the last 6 weeks. And Jordan Lewis, I think, in the last 6 weeks is a great example of why coaches like veteran players.
Absolutely.
Regardless of physical limitations or maybe he doesn't have the same step that he once did. You see what toughness and football IQ and those things can get you. I think Jordan Lewis has been such a big part because we were in that Seattle game. We're like, man, there's a real chance for them to pick on Jordan Lewis in this game and make things really difficult. And from that moment on, he's made a lot of really big plays. I mean, you see the toughness against Washington, reaching in there, stripping the ball out, creating turnovers. He is not afraid in the run game despite his size limitations. I think that he's a really important player. Absolutely. A really intelligent football player, a tough football player, a leader for them, I think, on that side of the ball. And then the other guy that I'm seeing some positive steps times. It was a bad game against Buffalo. It was a really bad game against Buffalo. But in recent weeks, I'm seeing some bounce back from Damone Clark.
Yeah.
And I think that if you can get a good version of Damone Clark, that goes a long way to stabilizing some of the concerns you might have on defense.
Yeah, I think the guy that I would like to say on defense, you mentioned Clark, but how about throw in Donovan Wilson?
Yeah.
And if you can get Donovan Wilson to play like Dono, who is the tough, hard-nosed, create turnovers, knock people out, be physical. I mean, there's been times where he's not played well with his eyes, but that turnover he had the other night in the game, the ability for him to be in the right position and coverage to get the interception. And he's a guy that's always going to punch and pull at the ball.
Yeah.
He's also going to hit. If you get that, not the Donovan Wilson, but you get Dono, that crazed safety linebacker hybrid player, that could go a long way to help.
Dan Quinn said in training camp when we got a chance to talk to him on Sean and RJ in Oxnard, I had asked him, like, who are the tone setters? Who are the guys that when new players come into this, locker room, you say, hey, if you're looking for the standard, if you're looking for the example of what I expect from you in terms of toughness and physicality, look at this guy. He said that guy for him in the back seven is Donovan Wilson. That's the guy that he points to guys in the back seven and says, hey, if you need to know what our standard is in terms of what we expect from you in terms of being a physical football player, being a tough football player, somebody who's going to show that sort of toughness and physicality on that side of the ball, you need to look at Donovan Wilson. Yeah. Emulate what he does, and that's what we get out of him. So definitely a big X factor there for the Cowboys. You are listening to the Love the Star podcast, the Love the Stars and Odyssey podcast. You can find it on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Brian, we did get a little bit of news there. Black Monday hit. There have been several firings, GMs, head coaches, coordinators, things like that. Jobs are coming open, and we already know of several teams that are interested in a couple of people here with the Dallas Cowboys. Dan Quinn, already there has been expressed interest publicly from the Panthers, the Commanders, and the Chargers. The Panthers and the Commanders as well have interest in talking to Will McClay. And there's always been, let's take the Dan Quinn angle of this first, because I think it's really interesting to look at. We interviewed KJ Wright on 105 Through the Fan, a guy who played for Dan Quinn, right? Is somebody who still has a relationship with Dan Quinn, talks to him. KJ Wright's in the media now and is in the Odyssey family. And KJ, we had asked him like, hey, do you think that Dan is they're going to be able to keep Dan around, successfully keep him this year? And he said, no, I don't. I think this is the year that he takes a head coaching job. And we asked him, we said, did you think the last 2 years that he was going to take one? And he said, no. And so KJ did not think that he was somebody who was going to take a head coaching job the last 2 years. He didn't. That surprised many of us. But KJ said, no, I think this is the year. And this was before Brandon Staley lost his job. He said, I think the spot you need to watch is the Chargers. Yeah. And so that being a guy that's getting an interview there's already Kellen Moore and Doug Nussmeier on that staff who obviously he has some familiarity with and works with. I've had that in the back of my mind about what KJ Wright said. And it makes me look at the Chargers, especially with a young, really talented quarterback there, the best quarterback situation of those three teams that are potentially interviewing him. And it would make a lot of sense. Do you think that there's any hope short of the Cowboys head coaching position coming open? Do you think there's any hope of keeping Dan Quinn here one more year?
I think that Dan Quinn wants to see this thing through, and whatever happens with the run, I think Dan Quinn is completely committed to that. But I also do believe, in talking to people that are very close to Dan Quinn, that he wants another opportunity coaching in this league as the head coach. I think he wants to show people that the things that he learned from Atlanta and then the time that he's been here with the Cowboys, the relationship that he's built. I think Dan Quinn understands now the importance of working with personnel departments. This is where I feel like that the Commanders and the Panthers are really doing something smart here. Mm-hmm. Because and I don't know if Will McClay is going to leave. I know that Will McClay is in a situation right now where he has a son is in here that is in high school that he'd like to have him finish up. And I don't know if Will would want to leave right now. And he's got a great relationship with Jerry and Steven. He has a lot of latitude to do what he needs to do. But there might be a package deal here between Will McClay and then also Dan Quinn.
Which is interesting because the last couple of years when we've talked about Quinn going somewhere, it's been Quinn has liked the idea of going with a personnel guy, and it's been George Payton in the past.
Right.
And so that would fit something that what Quinn looks for in a job is like, hey, let me go there in a package deal with a personnel guy that I trust. And he and Will McClay have a great relationship.
They have a great relationship. And I think Will thinks the world of him. I think that, and Dan absolutely thinks the world of Will. He trusts Will. They work together. They were in the coaching booth together. When Dan was up there working, Will at one time was sitting up there with him. And then, they made a switch. The head coach asked that they don't do that anymore. So now, Will sits with Jerry and Steven and does those things. But if Dan were to go, I guarantee you, if there's a general manager opening at the same spot, he is going to push super, super hard for Will McClay. I think it would be really hard for Will to leave the Dallas Cowboys right now because of his family situation. But we're going to get a day here coming soon where Will McClay will go run his own team. I mean, he has great latitude to do things here with the Cowboys, but he also would like the opportunity to make his own calls, to get his own players, to build his own staff, to that be his team. And I think the things he deals with ownership, the scouts, and the coaches, all here, that Bermuda Triangle that he's in the middle of, he knows how to manage people from top to bottom. He's not a guy that's he knows how to put himself in different levels of the organization, and people respect him for that. And I think the Cowboys have clearly gotten better with him as the player personnel guy. They clearly have. The Jeff Irelands, the Tom Siskowskis, now the Will McClays, they're clearly better with their evaluations with Will McClay running the organization.
Yeah. And, Will McClay, I think one of the things that sticks out to me that's really interesting about Will McClay when you talk to people around the league about him is that I think for a lot of fans, they think of it just as like, okay, here is the structure of a personnel department and you have a guy at the top, scouts underneath who do this. It's it's a very particular process that Will McClay believes in and has instilled in guys and has structured a personnel department in a way that is unique from a lot of other front offices in the NFL. I mean, it really is, when people talk about, the Patriot way or the Belichick way or whatever, there is a Will McClay way in personnel. And I think that it's been tested and it's been proven correct. And he's found a lot of really talented evaluators underneath him that he's brought up. I think that's the scary thing about potentially losing Will McClay too, is you don't just
maybe losing 2 or 3 other guys.
You don't just lose a Will McClay. You may lose a couple guys who say, hey, I like what Will does. And Will says, hey, I want somebody to come here who I know knows the way that I do things and can help build out a personnel department. And so I think that may be something that Jerry and Steven have to wrestle with as well when they evaluate this question. What are we willing to do to keep him? It's not just what are you willing to do to keep Will McClay? It might be what are you willing to do to keep Will McClay and keep maybe a handful of personnel people as well.
Yeah, I do not think, and this is just me, and I've known Will for a long time, and I haven't talked to him about this, but I don't think Will McClay will make it about him either give me the general manager title here or I'm leaving. I don't think that. I think he has so much respect for Steven and Jerry and the Jones family that if he takes this job, it'll be because it's the right thing for him to do. But he is not going to hold or play a leverage move over Jerry Jones and say, you either give me the general manager title or I'm walking.
Oh, sure. I guess I mean it more from the...
No, I'm not. Yeah. I'm just telling you that's what's going to go down. Will is not going to make this. It's either going to be the right decision for him or it's going to be, I'm going to stay here and help the Jones family continue to find players for this football team.
And look, Jerry's got a long history. We can point to Sean Payton when he almost took the Raiders job. You've talked about that story before. You've got Dan Quinn the last couple of years when it looked like he was able to.
Dan Quinn had the Denver job until ownership decided to sell. Until once ownership decided to sell, they were going to hire an offensive coach. George Payton was going to hire an offensive coach. Mm-hmm. That was what it was going to be. So, he was told a directive. They went out and they hired Hackett, and it was a total disaster. So, Dan was going to get that Denver job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rug got pulled from underneath him when ownership.
I think there was a chance he could have gotten the Denver job last year too. I think they were very interested in him.
Absolutely.
And definitely in 21, I think in 21, there was a big expectation that that's where he was going.
Right.
And just some things changed there. But it is something where we've seen the Joneses have been able to convince people to stay before. And obviously it didn't work out the way people wanted, but you got to remember Baltimore's first choice in 2008 was Jason Garrett.
Yeah.
And they offered him the job and he stayed in Dallas, and they give it to John Harbaugh, who's still in Baltimore, been there for years now. But they've been really good at being able to retain people and convince them that, hey, this is the place that you want to be. And so I do think that if there's anybody who understands that and anybody who believes that after all these years, it's probably Will McClay, who has a deep appreciation for what they do here. And I think they have a deep respect for him as well. And they put a lot of weight on what it is that he has to say. And so that's why I think it's just, if it's the right decision, it may be something where it's like, there's not much you can say or much you can offer if this is the right decision at the right time.
Will loves,
and I don't think there'd be any hard feelings here.
Will
this
loves
is something,
this place. Will loves this place. And he really appreciates working.
He has made them a perennial contender. He is probably the biggest reason for them being a perennial contender if you have to put it on one person.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so he's done a really impressive job. So, okay, Brian, before we get to the mailbag here, then I'm curious for you. If you were to look into your crystal ball, next season, 2024, when we're in Oxnard, is Will McClay still with the Cowboys, and is Dan Quinn still with the Cowboys?
Dan Quinn's not. Will McClay is. But I also, you asked me the question, so I answered the best. But I do believe there could very well be a package deal.
It would make a lot of sense.
If Will is going to leave, I believe it would be to go with a guy like Dan Quinn. That's, now that's depending on what happens too with Mike McCarthy. And we'll get into this, if all of a sudden, Jerry Jones believes their path is the right path now.
If they lose by 2 touchdowns to the Packers, that job might be open.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. So if I had to say right now, I would say Dan is likely going to get a head coaching job and Will is probably going to stay. That would be my guess.
You are listening to the Love the Star podcast, the Love the Stars and Odyssey podcast. You can find it on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Brian, it is now time for our Dean Julia Love the Star mailbag. It's where we turn things over to our dear sweet listeners, get their thoughts and opinions on things. First question here from Ian Tisdale, who I don't think we've gotten a question from before. Ian says, any chance that TJ Bass moves to center next year? Tyler Biotish is out of contract. TJ Bass has played well at times when he's been asked to step in. I know they gave him some snaps at center. Solari's big on cross training in general. Right. That's Mike Solari, the offensive line coach for the Cowboys. But I know they did try some stuff with Bass, and the Cowboys have shown that in recent years, especially under Mike McCarthy, that they've tried to find, okay, if we've got somebody here who we like, but maybe they don't have an opportunity, let's try and work them at center. They tried to do that with McGovern at times. They did it with Connor Williams a little bit before he moved. So do you think, just what you've seen from TJ Bass, is that a guy that you think could potentially cross over and play some center?
Yeah, I wonder if you could just go ahead and put Tyler Smith at left tackle and put TJ Bass at left guard.
How did he look on tape?
Just fine. He's a fine. I mean, matter of fact, those three guys, the inside three, did a really nice job. I know Jonathan Allen wouldn't play in this game, but man, these guys are. I said it. They played a beautiful game. The only thing that happened to TJ Bass in that game is on the tipped interception, he got yanked. He couldn't get away from Ridgeway. Ridgeway grabbed his jersey and pulled him, and that allowed the looper to come and tip the ball, which it resulted in the interception. Other than that, he played a beautiful game.
Is he the foot athlete that you would want at center, though? Potentially,
he is.
He's so strong.
He is. That's his thing. I don't know. I think I would want a more athletic center. I think where he is really good is his ability to get his hands inside and sit down on people in pass protection. And he's got an awareness of what's happening around him. Like, he knew there was a twist. Him and Tyron passed the twist. He got yanked.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guard who's playing some center, and you got to remember, at Oregon, he was a tackle.
Yeah,
he was a tackle at Oregon.
I keep him at guard. I really do, and I try and find another center is what I try and do. If you have to.
Next question here from Jason Tim, and further to that point, because we also have to talk about Brock Hoffman. Boy, I got to say, coming off the field when they won the division, there may not have been anybody more excited and more hyped than Brock Hoffman, who played in that one game, which great for him. He did an admirable job. But Jason is asking, did the backup guards, Hoffman at right guard with Zach Martin sick?
That's
Tyler
the guy that could play center.
Yeah, that's a guy that they liked. That was the guy that they were talking about.
Yeah.
You heard whispers in training camp when Zach Martin was potentially holding out. You heard some, or was holding out, and was potentially going to miss time. You heard some whispers that they're like, we may roll with Hoffman as the starter at right guard.
Yeah.
But did the backup guards play better than the starting guards have recently, is what Jason Tim wants to know. He says, because it looks like Dallas actually ran the ball with some success. So did you think they were
Commanders
better? That's what it is.
It's the Commanders.
It's scaled to opponent. But I mean, we talked about Bass a little bit there. What did you think about what you saw from Hoffman against the
I told you, like, all three of those inside guys played very, very well in this football game. Hoffman, the thing about Hoffman, there's nothing pretty about his game. I mean, the technique. Bass on the other way is like sit, set, like movement, all that stuff. Hoffman is kind of a brawler mauler guy. Like, he's battling, he get knocked around, but he stays in position. But yeah, I was impressed with the way those guys played. I really, really was.
Next question from Mike Hill. Is there even more that Dan Quinn can do to free Micah from the double and triple teams he's seen?
Yeah.
Start him off the ball, have him realign just before the snap. Dan Quinn obviously has done a great job in 3 years here of really trying to find the best possible matchup for Dan Quinn. But when you watch the tape, do you look, or for Mike Parsons, but when you watch the tape, do you look at it and say, hey, maybe there's some other different things you can do here to free Micah up?
Yeah. They cover the guards and they put Micah one-on-one on the center. Period. Now it's hard to double Micah when both guards are covered, and then you got the edge and you got the tackle,
which he's gotten some sacks in his career from the zero technique, like just being right, obviously not hand in the dirt, but right over the center.
One of the things they did was they put Micah's off ball, like 2 to 3 yards off the ball over center, like it was like a kind of a tight Mike linebacker, and they put Clark behind him. So you had Micah kind of patrolling along the line of scrimmage, and you had Clark behind him, so you had it at a couple different levels. If they tried to get to Micah and block Micah, then that allowed Clark to run to the football. So Dan Quinn, by putting Micah at middle linebacker, that's the way you keep him from getting double teamed.
Is there anything to the idea of, and I don't just mean trick plays or anything like that, do coaches tend to hide certain schematic things until you say like, hey, maybe I'll just pocket this. I haven't needed to use it. Do you think we're going to see some different things from Dan Quinn when we get into the playoffs?
Yep. The thing that I learned about from like Bill Belichick and listen to Mike Lombardi, who's my dear friend, talk about that. Belichick always talked about what you did at certain points of the game. And you always kept a scheme at the very end of the game. An example of what they did against the Seahawks in the Super Bowl that ended up being the interception.
Yeah.
Hadn't shown the scheme hadn't shown it the whole day. And then all of a sudden they go in that critical situation. So coaches are always good at keeping one or two things into that third or fourth quarter that could make a difference in the game.
Do you think it's something as particular as within the game, though, or do you think there's something like, hey, we might see a blitz concept or a coverage concept that Dan Quinn has done? Because one of the things, one of the things you'll hear about the Cowboys, and one of the things that you can see on tape is they don't disguise a lot. They will give it to you pretty straightforward. So do you think that there might be a little bit more? I
see some more rotation than you think. I mean, it's not total. I'm sure if you watch,
it's not Jason Garrett. Just we're going to line up and beat you.
No.
But it's not nearly as much coverage disguise as other teams.
There's some rotation of too deep, and all of a sudden drive the other safety down to play the crossers, the robbers, and stuff like that. There's some different rotational looks that you'll see during this.
What kind of schematic differences or tweaks or wrinkles do you think we're more likely to see? Some schematic tweaks from Dan Quinn in terms of what he's doing in terms of blitz packages, or some different things he's doing in coverage disguise potentially? Which coverage or blitz, which do you think we're more likely to see some different variations from?
Coverage.
Okay.
Coverage, yeah.
And this one's a little broad for you, but it'll give you space to take this any way you want. And it kind of brings us back to this discussion about where this team is. This question from Chris Sarvis. Brian, why should I trust this year's Cowboys team? What is your greatest reason for trust in this Cowboys team?
You should trust because of the quarterback. You really should. You should trust the quarterback. The quarterback's played beautifully this year. He really, really has. He's been outstanding. He's seeing the field well. He's not making mistakes, with the ball. I mean, we haven't seen a lot of tip balls, and although, I mean, we saw the tip ball, but we haven't seen him not see the guy and just throw it right to him. We haven't seen those kinds of bad turnovers.
He kept his interceptions in single digits.
He sure did. And I think you got to be confident in the play caller, because he's found ways to get the ball creatively to CeeDee Lamb, or to get it to Ferguson, or to get it to Cooks, or to put Turpin in the backfield and hand it to him, But the main confidence you should have is you have an elite wide receiver, probably one of the top 3 wide receivers in the league, and you have a quarterback playing at an MVP level. That is going to be your ticket to going far in this thing. If it fails, I don't think it's going to be because of Lamb or Prescott. I think it's going to be something else that let them down. But I think those two guys are going to continue to play at a very, very high level.
If you were on the opposing sideline, and it doesn't have to be Green Bay specifically, because obviously you coach to personnel. Yeah. But if you were on an opposing sideline and just let's say you had a random pull of defenders, what is your strategy? What are you talking about in the game plan during the week of like, hey, let's try this kind of stuff with CeeDee Lamb? Because obviously there's very few weaknesses in his game. What is the idea here? Is it just as simple as like, hey, you got to bracket him? You got to do some different things.
Hard to bracket him when he's on the move, or when you're playing him in the slot, and you got guys. Say you're traveling, and you got guys that won't go in the slot as a traveler.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're matching up. Now you move him. You're just, if somebody's going to try and bracket him by the way they're playing coverage, keep moving him. Put him in the backfield. Run him out. Put him up. Put him tight. Run him bunch. Scatter him. Bring him across in motion. Run him out. Run him up. Just keep him on the move so people cannot get that. Okay, we got this guy here. We're playing it in and out. No, by him moving, you're going to affect how they play him. So I think McCarthy Schottenheimer. I think these coaches got a good understanding how to keep him going. We everybody in the ballpark knows that CeeDee Lamb is going to get the ball, right?
Yeah.
13 times, 17 times. He still makes plays. Yeah.
When you talk about that, though, the idea of make sure that you're kind of moving them around, doing some different things, does that responsibility fall mainly on McCarthy? Does that responsibility, if that's something that Dak and CeeDee are running into, is that some of the line of scrimmage that like, hey, we've got to change some things up here? This is on us as the guys.
That's as the game's going on. Is that
a shared responsibility, or would you say, hey, that's more on the coach, or that's more on Dak and CeeDee to figure that out?
Coaches have got to know if he gets bracketed in a game, here's our bracket plan. Now, if he gets bracketed and they start taking him out of a game, say it does happen, Cooks needs to be involved, which he is absolutely involved. He is so much better an option than what you've had the last couple of years as the two. Yeah.
One last follow-up question I'm using the love of the star mailbag to ask my own mailbag questions here for you, Brian. Last one here, though, on the idea of guarding this offense, and we talk about changing things up. Yeah. Cooks is obviously really good. He can hit you from 40 yards. He can hit you from 5 yards. He's really good in the red zone. We talk about what CeeDee Lamb can do. If the Cowboys are consistently able to hit the seam throw to Ferguson, is there any way you can defend the passing game?
Not at all. No.
That's something where if they're able to hit that, there's no way to cut the field.
If let them hit the seam or get a screen game going. If Dallas could get a screen game going with Pollard, that would make my heart sink. Because playoff football, a lot of that it's about those. It's pressure. Now the screen goes out the back door. How many times have we seen a screen game go for 30-something yards? Not much here in Dallas. But Pollard, the play he made up the side with jumping up for the ball.
Yeah.
Pollard's capable of catching the ball. You had a good screen the other day with Deuce Vaughn. Deuce Vaughn went inside instead of staying to the outside. If that's Pollard, he stays wide and lets Martin kick his guy inside. So, that's up the sidelines. Let me have a seam or a really good scheme game, a screen game.
That does it for us here today on the Love of the Star podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back with a couple more episodes this week, taking a look at the Packers and hopefully, look, into the offseason, we're still going to be doing 2 episodes a week, but hopefully we can keep up the 3 a week until the Super Bowl is won in Vegas. Hopefully this is the year. Yeah. This is setting up really nicely for this Cowboys team, and I think that there's a sense among your quarterback, your head coach, your owner and general manager. I think there's a sense that this is a real opportunity, unlike some of the years past. So a good chance, and we'll have all of the preview for you when we take a look at the Packers later this week. For Brian Broaddus, I'm Bobby Belt. We will talk to you guys again later.